All right, hello everybody. Welcome back. We're going to be getting into some pretty interesting stuff in this particular section. Uh, Specifically, what we're going to be doing is talking about how you can present the information from your study, sort of show your chops when it comes to some of the stuff that you've covered in your previous research methods classes. Just to set the stage as to where we should be at this point. I'm guessing all of you have submitted your articles, at least the skeletons of the articles that includes an introduction and APA formatted reference page and citations, as well as all the kind of just made to fit in structures that you'll be adding in the remaining portions of this class. I mean, believe it or not, we are really kind of hitting the home stretch for this assignment and for all of the things that you need to put together for this class. You're going to be ready for a lot of those future classes that you're going to be taking, well, specifically the senior research project class that you're going to be taking. So what are we going to be doing to show our chops? As I said, what we're going to be doing in this week is going over how our understanding of methods works and how we set up our paper in that APA formatting that we've been referencing time and time again. Specifically, we're going to be looking at how to put together both your methods section and your results section, something that theoretically you've already conceptually thought of, but now we're going to put it onto paper. For those of you that need a kind of reminder of the different layout of sections that you have in an APA formatted paper, you get your title page, get your abstract. That's followed by your introduction. And then right after that are the two sections that we're going to be looking at in today's class, the methods section and the results section. The methods section in concept is about you describing what your study was all about, giving the details of what you did, who you sampled, how you ran the study, and how you're defining the terms and concepts that you're going to be using for this particular paper. That's why we've been looking at how you define terms, what types of study you're running in previous sections. So you sort of have that stuff clarified. Some of you still need to work on this, honestly. Some of you I've said you want to rethink what terms you're using for your variables that you're describing. You want to make sure that you're clear on how you're applying those. It might take a little bit more work, maybe some meetings, and just making sure that you're clear on that stuff. Many of you, we've already taken care of the first steps. It's more now about transitioning into how you to describe this in an APA formatted paper. When we get into the methods section, what we have to do, which is sort of unique in this section, is break up the section into subsections, little categories that go over specific details to your study. The first subsection in every method section are your participants. Here you're going to describe basic demographics about the individuals that you're using and nuanced details about things like how you sample or where they're coming from or special things that we might want to consider based on what it is that you collected. Obviously, we're working with made up data, so you can sort of make up where your participants are coming in this specific instance. Some of you have already keyed in on exactly who you would be looking at. Others, we've sort of gone off script in that we're looking at things that aren't necessarily things that you could study with a student population in somewhere like Cal State East Bay. So you might, if you're in that other group, kind of have to figure out where you would even get participants to participate in the study and sort of give a breakdown of what they might look like here. Again, since this is theoretically going to be about what you've done, because that's what these papers are, there should be stuff that you're describing in the past tense, so making up participants, where they came from, their basic data, with the assumption that you're just describing them, not who you're going to go get for your particular study. Once you've done that subsection, then you move on to the second subsection, which is called the apparatus and material section. This one is interesting. If you are running like a cognitive psychology experiment or a neuroscience experiment, This particular section can be gigantic. I've seen people have 3, 4 page sections that just go over the apparatus and materials for their studies. Most of us, though, probably won't have much in this section. Your materials primarily consist of surveys or some sort of thing that you come up with to kind of measure, quantify something in individuals. From my recollection of what we decided to do for these, I don't think anybody really has a gigantic apparatus and materials section. And in fact, most of you don't really require materials at all for your studies. It's more just the apparatus that you're using, the surveys that you're going to be including in your study. It's not about the computer programs that you're using to analyze stuff. That's actually not included in this. It's about what did you use for your study. So if you used a specific survey from some depression index that you found, or if you decided to measure intelligence through something else, or you just came up with your own questionnaire on something, this is what you'd be describing here. Some of you have been very specific in your proposals as to what types of surveys you're going to use, what types of measures you're going to get. Others, we've been kind of broad and a little unclear as to exactly how we would quantify something. If you're in the unclear area, now is the time to hone in on what you could have possibly done to accumulate some of the information that we used in our data analysis. What surveys are out there? What techniques could be used to measure something on a scale? That's what's going to be included in that particular section. And you want to, in this section, really be specific as to what's there. The goal in it is to try to be able to describe something so well that if somebody wanted to replicate your study, they'd know exactly what tools they needed to accumulate to be able to do that. Of course, for them to be able to do it perfectly, the other thing that they need is the last section that's going to be included within your methods section, which is called the procedures area. And this is going to first just lay out the step-by-step detail of what happened within your experiment. But what it's also going to do, which is why we've been asking for it in previous assignments, is ask you to define your variables, ask you to define the setup of your study. In essence, you're not only getting into the process that you're going through within your study here, but you're talking about how you set up your design to justify the analysis that you're going to be doing. So if you've got something like a nominal variable for your independent variable and ratio variable for your dependent variable because you ran an experiment where you had a control group and an experimental group, then you should be describing those things in that way. And that lets the reader know, okay, there was a manipulation, and therefore they should be doing this type of assessment or this type of analysis when they're measuring out things like their just statistically significant effect and their effect size that they're interested in looking at. You'd also, within this, be able to hopefully present to the reader a good rationale for why you set up things the way you did, a real good explanation as to kind of the limitations of being able to have, say, an independent variable. Maybe you don't have that, or maybe you're struggling to kind of talk about causation because you couldn't manipulate something in some specific way, or you had to use something like an interval variable versus a ratio variable for something because of blank. Right? This is all included within the procedures section. Honestly, for a lot of you, this is probably going to be the biggest part of your methods section. The apparatus section or material section, it's going to be relatively small. I'm going to cover a couple things as to what you used for your study, again, so people could maybe replicate it somewhere down the road, and you're done with that. The participants, we give the basic demographics of them, basic details of what they're like. Obviously, for both of those two, you're probably making those things up because we didn't actually have true participants, but you understand the gist of it. You can include that in those sections, and then you transfer over to the procedures section where you really do have to lay things out. And the goal here for statisticians is not to necessarily just replicate what you're doing when they look at your procedures section. It's to understand what analyses they should expect to see in the next section. right? If you've clearly detailed exactly what type of a design you have, what steps you're implementing, a good trained researcher will be able to look at that and say, yep, you're good. This is the statistical analysis I'm seeing, or whoa, something's already off. There's no logical flow here. There's something missing. You're not doing the right design, or you're not defining your terms correctly, and it's going to carry over later on. Usually, when you're reading articles and assessing, are they good? Is this something that makes sense? This is the biggest stop that lots of people go to. This is the thing that lots of people focus in on. Because as I mentioned multiple times before, you have a wonderful idea, wonderful design to your study. But if you don't know how to define things, if you don't know how to set things up so you can do an analysis, yeah, you've kind of ruined the entire study and there's no way coming back from it, right? You have to have a sound understanding of procedures. So over the next 2 weeks, because this is a 2 week assignment before you have to turn this in, actually 3 weeks because we've got spring break. Um, this is something that you really want to slowly work your way through. Make sure you're defining things very well in this component. If you've got clarification questions, email me, talk to a tutor, make sure you understand this stuff, because hope is that you've gone through our method sections, you've gone through our stats sections in classes before, that is. So you understand the gist of it, but you might need some refreshers on it, and it's really critical to get that stuff taken care of before you plow through this section, because it does require a lot of work. You've done that, you've gone through the procedure section, well, then we move on to the last portion, which is very sometimes burdensome to write, but it kind of writes itself once you've collected the data and you've set things up correctly so you know which analysis to do. It's the results section, which is not a subsection of the method section, but its own section entirely within an APA formatted study, or sorry, paper. When you're writing your paper in the results section, your study design dictates greatly how you're going to present the data, right? Some of you might present T statistics and F statistics or correlation coefficients. It could go all over the place. I've even seen some that are looking at chi-squared tests. And your study design, which again was described before, determines which types of results we should expect to see listed in this section. Universally, these particular results need to cover some key elements. First thing is just general information about the variables collected. Usually we're looking for things like averages. And this could be means or modes, depending upon the type of data we're looking at. Usually we're looking for things like measures of central tendency and measures of variabilities. We might report multiple means or types of means, well, multiple types of measures of central tendency, I guess. So mean, median, mode, depending upon, again, the data we have, and measures of variability where we're looking at how much wiggle room there is within the variables we're studying. This isn't necessarily part of our statistical analysis as to whether or not we found something, but this is basic information that a reader's going to want to know so they can understand what your data sort of looks like. After you're done presenting that basic information, the way that you're going to assess things, you're going to then move on to presenting your results itself. Usually when you talk about the effects, whether or not you found one or not, and how you determine that based on things like the value of the effect you found and the statistical significance of it, reporting the p-value and whether or not that was greater or less than your alpha values that you set up. The other thing that you're going to be doing here in this every single time is reporting your effect sizes. So not only presenting a measure of effect size, but also the magnitude of it. Was this based on what you found, a small effect, a medium effect, a large effect? If you can, if you're that good, you might even talk about how this effect size relates to the effect that you found, the statistical significance of it, and try to tie that to things like power, or other concepts around sampling, where there might sometimes be, with small samples like we had, a slight mismatch between what you seem to be finding for your effect size and whether or not you found something statistically significant. Now, a couple of you have spoken with that about, or spoken with me about that in previous weeks because you found results that seem to be good, but don't seem to pass the threshold you need to say something statistically significant. This is a great place to kind of cover those items. Now, you're going to discuss it more in the discussion section, which we'll be covering next week. We're going to get to that later on. But just bringing that up here, alluding to it, is a big component of your results section. The reason why, when we're talking about these results section, we call it kind of painful and tedious is because in conjunction with reporting all of these things, the other thing that you have to do is you have to make sure that you're reporting these things in APA format. And honestly, APA formatting for these particular sections are painful. Right? There are entire sections on how to present statistics. I'm going to pull those up and give you a link to them as you progress so you know how to report a T statistic when you've conducted a study that merits doing a T test. You're going to need to know how to, an APA format, report an effect size like Cohen's d or something else that you might be using, again, depending upon the type of test that you've run, in the exact format that's expected. It really is kind of tedious to present information in the APA format that people are asked to do it in, but there is logic behind it. Just like with this procedure section, we want to be able to replicate a study and understand exactly what somebody's going to do by having them lay out all the details of their work in APA formatting. So expectations also there in the results section. You just start throwing out random numbers without giving any context around what analysis or type of test is being run. You're not presenting it in APA format with discussing things like degrees of freedom and other stuff. Good reader will look at that and question, what the heck is going on with that data? Or are you just not reporting everything, or you kind of just making up numbers? How did you get to that analysis? Where did it come from? A really good presentation of results will allow somebody trained in statistical analysis to be able to look at what you presented and say, that works. Might not know the exact data, but that seems to work. Or there's something fishy here, something that's not quite right. And if they do want to get your data, technically, if you're going on, they could ask to look at your data and see whether or not their results that they got match up with yours, or they might even just be able to say when looking at your stuff, you did the wrong type of analysis or presented stuff in the wrong way. This is a lot of lifting, honestly, when you get to this section. But if you can work on this now, you can really hone in on how to access this stuff, how to write this stuff, how to organize it. What that allows you to do when you get to your senior thesis coming up in another semester or two is you can spend your time on the research itself, because you can't learn this stuff when you get to that point in your academic career. That would be tedious. You don't want to double your time trying to figure out how to present the work that you have to do. You have to have that squared away so you can literally just take some framework like the one that you're going to have for this class and use it for that future class. So I want you to really do the heavy lifting on these results sections and methods sections now in this class. So when you move forward, when you move on to the future ones where you've got to spend a lot of time actually collecting real data and running the studies and doing much more complicated analyses, you'll be able to do those things, dedicate your time to those things, and power through this kind of stuff. Because once you learn the tools, it's not that bad. But developing these skills does take time and energy. So please give yourself sufficient time to do this. Reference not only this resource, which I'll put up on the class website when you're trying to figure out how do I set up these things, but reference the other ones that I'm going to post with respect to how do you write out specific results in APA format? Because it does take time to be able to hone in on that skill. And honestly, unless you had a very specific class where they were asking you to do this, this is probably new to you. I know some of you might have had some upper division stats classes where you were asked to do this, but my anticipation is the vast majority of you have never done this. And because of that, we're going to have an extra week where we dedicate our time to this. And honestly, we've already done a lot of these analyses to begin with, but now it's time to turn it into something that's an APA format. So you're getting sort of an extra week to do this because there is this realization. It's a challenge. It takes some time to kind of figure this stuff out. So um, hopefully this makes sense. And hopefully if you do have questions along the way, you let me know. I'm happy to clarify that stuff. If you're ready to do this on your own, by all means, give it a go, give it a shot, do your best. And these two sections should be, just to clarify, added into your current existing paper. So I'm going to just grade the methods and the results section. Well, you're also going to get into the discussion section because the rough draft is going to be due, and that's going to be the last thing that you're going to be talking about when you get to the final portion of your paper that we'll cover next week in class. But anyway, this is going to be the main thing you're going to be focusing on now, filling out those methods and results sections. And then next week, we'll talk about how to fill out those discussion sections. I'm kind of droning on. So I'm going to bid you all adieu. Email me if anything comes up. Make sure you check out those resources and good luck and have a great spring break, all of you as well. Take care.